A very good evening, dear friends. Welcome back again to our PG training program. A warm welcome to all the postgraduates, the second module of the PG training program, and happy to say that all the PGs have joined and are joining still. Please make it fast. Yeah. And PGs, we have with us the best of the best speaker, Dr. Ganesh V. Raman, the Chief Consultant Glaucoma Services at Aravind Eye Hospital, Coimbatore, to teach you and guide you in how to read and understand about HFA, octopus, and OCT in glaucoma. A warm welcome, Dr. Ganesh. As we
Thank you,
have
madam.
already mentioned, please utilize this training program to the best by interacting and clearing all your queries and all your doubts. Now, let me welcome Dr. Shishira, Senior Consultant at Puttalat Eye Hospital, to moderate this PG program. Welcome, Shishira.
Thank you, ma'am.
And now over to Dr. Mihir, the Senior Consultant, Vasan Eye Hospital, and our Treasurer, Kozhikode Ophthalmic Society, to introduce the speaker. Thank you all, and stay tuned till the end of the program and asking questions and interacting with our speaker. Wishing you all the best. Thank you.
So, good evening all. Welcome to the second module of the PG exam buster series. I believe we have some PGs from outside Calicut joining us today. So I welcome them all. And I request all of you to, on your videos so that we can see all of you. So today's topic is about glaucoma, as already mentioned. So we have with us Dr. Ganesh Venkatraman, who is also a good friend of mine. So Dr. Ganesh Venkatraman completed his MS in ophthalmology from MGM Medical College, Indore. He did his fellowship in glaucoma from Aravind Eye Hospital, Coimbatore. He has been working in the glaucoma department at Aravind Eye Hospital, Coimbatore for the past 15 years and is now the chief consultant of the glaucoma department. He is a high-volume surgeon with extensive experience in procedures like patchless glaucoma valve implant, gonioscopy-assisted transluminal trabeculectomy, canaloplasty, and device-assisted trabeculectomy. He has, to his credit, 25 publications in national and international journals and has authored chapters in prestigious ophthalmology books. Currently, he is also the secretary of Coimbatore Society of Ophthalmic Surgeons. So we'll start the talk today. Dr. Shishira will be moderating the session. So over to Dr. Shishira.
Participants, I think it will be better to on your video so that as I said, we can see everyone. Try to make the session as interactive as possible. We have a very good speaker in front of us, and for the PGs, it is a golden opportunity to have such a discussion with him. So sir will be delivering his topics, and the participants, if you have any doubts, you can just type it in the chat box and we'll be discussing towards the end of the session. So please make use of this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Shishira.
Okay.
Can I start now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll share my screen. Thank you. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Vijay Lakshmi, Dr. President of Kozhikode Ophthalmic Association, Dr. Sujit, Secretary of the Association, and Dr. Mihisha. We know him. I know Dr. Mihisha through my wife, who was his UG batchmate during MBBS in Manipal. So we go back almost 2000 till 2004, and I was posted in Tirunelveli where Dr. Shah was doing his PG. So we spent almost 3 weeks together. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be back virtually in Kozhikode. We were there physically. I'll just see why my screen is not being shared. Yeah, okay, I got it. Right.
Yes, sir. We can see.
Okay, can you see?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Kozhikode Ophthalmic Society, for the opportunity. So I'll be speaking to you on visual fields and OCT imaging in glaucoma. This will, of course, include a little bit of octopus as well. Dr. Meisha requested me to include octopus. Octopus, we don't use octopus as such, so I'll be covering mainly the progression part of it. The basics, of course, you can always touch up on the books, but the progression is quite interesting, and that is what the conceptually you should know. So these are the books which it's the books which are available now and very easy to read. Particularly, I like to I have this on my pointer. Yeah, the book by Dr. Premanand Chandran. He is my colleague in Aravinda Hospital, Coimbatore, and he has authored this book, and it's available in Kindle for download and use. So it's actually his notes, and he has is thankfully has published it. So a lot of the material from the talk is from all these books. The second one, of course, you're familiar with Dr. G.R. Reddy's book on visual field evaluation, and then the Octopus Guide, the Visual Field Digest, and the Effective Perimetry, which is the Humphreys by Anders Heil, who's the author of the EMGT trial, so to say. So all these 4 books are you can easily refer, and a lot of the material from this talk is from these books. And for practitioners, the Visual Field Handbook is something which I would particularly recommend, because in just about, let's say, about 30-35 minutes, you can just flip through the pages, and you can, if you have a visual field in front of you, you can always compare it to the examples given in the book, and you can even get a solution to whatever is the queries which you have. So the outputs from the visual field machine, especially the Humphreys, you have these following: the single field analysis, the overview printout, 3-in-1 printout, and then you have custom fields. So this is how a single field analysis looks. So it has area where you have the basic information, and then you have the reliability indices, which are to the left and top of the field. Then you have the grayscale and the exact numerical plot of the patient. And then you have the total deviation numerical plot and the total deviation pattern plot, and then the total deviation probability plot. And then you have the pattern deviation numerical plot and the pattern deviation probability plot. And then you have the global indices here, which includes the GHD, visual field index, mean deviation, and the PSD. And then at the bottom, you have something called the gaze tracker, which helps the operator to identify whether the patient has been cooperating well or not. So the relation between the decibel value, the light intensity, and the retinal sensitivity, there's a relationship. So if you have a low decibel value for any reason, that means a high intensity of light stimulus was used, and the retina has very low retinal sensitivity. And if a high decibel value is given out by the machine, that means that is a low intensity of light stimulus was used, and the retina is very highly sensitive to that particular light. So this is how the concept works. So if you have a decrease in retinal sensitivity, you have to identify what is the degree of decrease in retinal threshold, number one. Where is that located in the retina? If it's in the arcuate region, number one, so it's more towards glaucoma, you could say. And how far is it from fixation? Because in glaucoma, as you know, fixation can be threatened. And what is the degree of fall of retinal sensitivity? Is it statistically abnormal? So what is the p-value? These are the 3 things which should immediately come to your mind. So if a patient is not able to see a particular, you have to know how much is the reduction, where is it located, and is it statistically significant? So the machine has something called a StatPack. StatPack is the software which is inside the machine, like how we use Windows or any other software. And it will analyze certain things, certain parameters. It will not analyze parameters which are apart. So it will analyze 30-2, 24-2, 10-2. It will not analyze a macular program, for example, or a 64-2 program. It will not analyze. It will analyze a CETA standard, CETA fast, full threshold fastpack. And it will only analyze if the stimulus size is 3. If the stimulus size varies, it becomes 4 or 5, you will not get central fixation target, small diamond, large diamond, and the other fluctuations, foveal threshold can be switched on or off. So coming to the defect as such, what is a scotoma? So it is a region in which there is less sensitivity than the surrounding area, non-seeing area within a seeing area. So it can be absolute, that means not seeing the stimulus with maximum size and maximum intensity available. It can be relative, able to see the stimulus when intensity or size is increased. Positive, when patient appreciates the defect. Negative, when we elicit the defect. Patient doesn't know, but we say that he has a defect, which is you could say something like physiological also, blind spot. And pathological occurs in glaucoma or large chorioretinal degenerations or vein occlusions sectorally. All these can cause pathological scotoma. And coming to the stimulus size which is used, the size 1 is 1/4 of a millimeter square, which is the smallest here, and size 2 is 1 millimeter square, which is here, and size 3 is 4 millimeter, which is commonly used, and size 4 is 16 millimeters, and size 5 is 64 millimeter. All these fall into the range of the blind spot. They can all fit into the blind spot. So the largest blind spot stimuli can be from 1 to 5. So it checks. So that's how the machine is designed. So all the stimulus can be fallen into the blind spot. And blind spot, as you know, measures approximately 5 degrees horizontally by 7 degrees vertically. So this is the concept of using these stimuli. So stimulus duration, how long is it presented? It's presented for about 200 milliseconds. It's long enough for the stimulus to be seen in the periphery, but short before the voluntary eye movements are initiated. So the patient does not have to turn the eye to see the stimulus by the time it disappears. Now, what happens is if you go for a faster assessment, for example, a CETA faster program, all the duration of presentation increases. So it allows the stimulus to be present even for 300 milliseconds. That's something which you have to know. Effect of the pupil size. Pupil size appropriately should be 3 to 4 millimeters. If it is constricted or dilated, you will get a diffuse visual field depression, edge scotomas, generalized reduction of sensitivity will be given in the GHT. So examiner enters the pupil size, visual acuity, refraction and all used, and newer instruments measure and enter the pupil size automatically. So pupil diameter should be about, in this particular example, it is 5.5 millimeter. So you have a generalized reduction of sensitivity. And if you look at the gaze tracker, it has wide fluctuations. Refractive error also will cause generalized depression. So correlate the visual acuity with the measured foveal threshold. So if the patient has a vision of 6/6, so he should have a visual foveal threshold of approximately 34, 35, 36, 37. Like that. Younger patients will have closer to 40. Older patients will be closer to 32. And if the glasses are not properly placed in the trial frame, then again the refractive error can play a truant role. So that's something which you have to remember. Now the grayscale, people say don't look at the grayscale too much, but it usually helps to look at the area in detail. And gross false positives for gross false negatives can be highlighted in the grayscale, which we'll come to a little later. It is useful in explaining areas of defect to the patient and relatives. So if you have a tubular field, you can tell the patient and his attendant what practical problems they're going to face if you have a field like this. And the threshold sensitivity range has been divided into 10 different shades of gray. So for example, in this, you can almost make out all the 10 different shades of gray. So 50 decibels is white area and black area is 0 decibels. So coming to the total deviation plot, it's a degree of deviation from the patient's retinal sensitivity from the expected normal retinal sensitivity for that age. So you have total deviation numerical plot, total deviation probability plot. And a symbol is assigned to each deviation value, indicating the probability of finding such a deviation in the general population. So this is how, so if you see here, this is a left eye of a 29-year-old female patient. Now this is a numerical plot of threshold sensitivity. This is something which is given adjacent to the grayscale. This is the patient's raw data, you can say. The exact values of a retinal threshold over various areas. Now what the machine does is it gives you an input like a total deviation, how far the patient is deviating from her age match normal. This is the whole value. Now the machine has to identify whether this is significant or not compared with respect to glaucoma. So what it will do is it will calculate the threshold and it will it will identify that this particular value is the threshold value for the patient. So in a total deviation numerical plot, you will always have 1 0. If it is a normal field, you'll definitely have at least 1 0. So that identifies the threshold for that particular individual according to the age match normal. Now from this, it will start identifying the 7th lowest point. So you can calculate. So you start from 3 here, then you go to 2. You have 2 2s, 3 2s, or 2 3s. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So approximately you have approximately the values which have to be deducted are approximately 2 could be the value. So if you find here 0 has been converted into minus 2. So this value is converted. The value which has been derived by the total deviation numerical plot is subtracted and then given as the pattern deviation numerical plot. So if it is minus 1 here, it becomes minus 2. If it's minus 1 here, it becomes minus 3. 0 becomes minus 1. 2 becomes 0. So like that, each value is subtracted. Approximately 2 is subtracted from this each value. So minus 2 becomes minus 4. So you get a pattern. So 7th best point is taken. 7th best point is taken. And then the resetting of the hill of vision is done. So I wants to identify from the general depression, what is the depression because of glaucoma alone. If you do this exercise here, you find that 30 is the numerical plot in this particular area that has been converted into 0. Now the computer will analyze the 7th best point. So it will start from somewhere around. So you have a lot of minus 2s. So all the minus 2s are taken, and then comes the minus 1. So the resetting of the hill of vision, whatever is the minus 1, that will be subtracted from the value in that area. So if you have minus 1, it will be added, and then you get a plus 1. Similarly, from here, if you see minus 2 plus 1, it will add to 1. So like that, you get a resetting of the hill of vision by doing this. That's how you get the pattern deviation numerical plot. Again, if you do the same exercise here, you'll find that 0, which is the 32. This is the threshold for the patient. And this has been reset to 0. From here, the calculation will occur to get the 7th best point, and that particular value, whichever is the 7th best point, will be subtracted. So from here, if you see, minus 7 has become minus 5. Minus 13 has become minus 11. So a value of 2 has been subtracted from each point and added to the total deviation plot to get the pattern deviation plot. So pattern deviation plot will show the localized depression such as glaucomas. It removes the generalized depression such as cataract and refractive error. And pattern deviation plot is not generated if the mean deviation is minus 20 decibels or less. For example, in this example, you see the mean deviation is minus 23. So you don't get a pattern deviation plot here. Coming to the glaucoma hemifield test, this is, as you all know, glaucoma is a disease of asymmetry. So it is asymmetric between the eyes, asymmetric within the eye. So within the eye, the superior and inferior hemifields don't match. That's how you diagnose glaucoma. So you have a superior field defect, the inferior is normal. Similarly, between the eyes also, primary glaucomas are usually asymmetric. So the glaucoma hemifield test tells you what is the relationship between the points superiorly and their mirror images inferiorly. The advantage of this is that whether you do it in a 30-2 or a 24-2, the peripheral points are excluded. The GHT, whether for 30-2 or a 24-2, remains the same. So output which you get is either outside normal limits, which is, in fact, if you recollect, it is part of the Anderson's criteria. Borderline, which can be applicable to glaucoma suspect, it can occur in 1 to 3% of the population. Generalized reduction of sensitivity, small pupil, refractive error, fatigue, advanced glaucoma, all these can cause a generalized reduction of sensitivity. Abnormal, high sensitivity, a trigger happy patient, and a normal will be given as a patient who has a normal field defect. No field defect. Global indices, coming to global indices, you have the mean deviation, you have the pattern deviation, and then you have the visual field index. So mean deviation is the average of all points in the total deviation plot. pattern deviation is the summarizes the localized loss in a single index. So if you want to know what exactly is a pattern, if you say -5, -6, that's quite high for that particular individual. Pattern standard deviation is high in moderate to advanced localized losses, low in normal fields, uniformly depressed fields, and blind fields. If the pattern standard deviation is improving, that is, visual field is deteriorating. That is another relationship to that. We'll come to that. What actually the pattern standard deviation answers is, what is the pattern of the standard deviation around the mean deviation? You all know mean deviation always comes with a standard deviation. So what actually it says is, what is the pattern of the standard deviation around the mean deviation which is present in that individual person? So for example, if you see here, like I mentioned, you won't get pattern deviation plot if you have a mean deviation worse than -25. So you have a mean deviation of -19 here, you have a pattern deviation probability plot. But here, the moment it crosses -25 decibels, you don't see. What actually it does is, it bases its output on the total deviation plot, total deviation probability plot. So that's something which you have to remember. So if something like this happens, you immediately have to repeat the field. For this individual patient, we asked them to repeat the field. We saw this patient October 2016, but it took almost 1 year for the patient to come back. So very rarely, even though you see the mean deviation is -23, you still get a pattern deviation probability plot here. So rarely it can occur, but usually if it is worse than -20, it may not show. Coming to the visual field index, this is a very important index, mainly because in one value, you can say what is the condition of the visual field for an individual. So that was not available previously. So visual field index is actually center weighted. Now you have center, this depends on the visual cortex. This depends on the visual cortex and how much the central ganglion cells are represented in the central gyrus of the vitreal in the calcarine sulcus there in the visual cortex. So most of the ganglion cells are present, about 3.29% of them are in the central area, and then 1.28, a factor of 1.28 is added to the second level of the visual field index diagram here, and then 0.79 to the third, and then 0.57 to the fourth, and 0.45 to the. So that's the proportion of ganglion cells which are central area, which is represented in the visual cortex. And if you see, visual field index progresses much faster than the mean deviation. For example, if it is center weighted, for example, the visual field index in this example is 92%, whereas the mean deviation is 0.77. So mean deviation is reduced by about, let's say, just about 2%, whereas visual field index is reduced by about 8%. Can you make that out? So visual field index, if the central points are involved, it gives a dramatically increase the gravity of the situation, whereas mean deviation has not reduced by such a proportion. So it is calculated as a visual field index, calculated as a percentage of normal visual field after age adjustment. It is more central weighted to correlate with the ganglion cell in the macula, and that represents in the visual cortex also. So if it's 100% normal fields, 0% perimetric blind eyes, and visual field index is calculated from the PD plot if the mean deviation is worse than -20 decibels. Sorry, it's a PD plot if it is better than 20 decibels, and if it is worse than 20 decibels, mean deviation worse than 20 decibels, then it is calculated from the total deviation plot. So again, this is another example. You can see that the mean deviation is -2.84, whereas because the central fields are involved, the visual field index is 93%. Whereas here you have random scotomas everywhere, you still have a mean deviation of -3, but the visual field index is 99%. That's a normal field. So as I mentioned, visual field index is again calculated from the, this is the same example as given previously. Coming to fixation losses, these are the reliability indices. You have a Heil-Krakow method in which a stimulus is presented to the blind spot, and if the patient is deviating or rotating his eyes or not concentrating on the mission, you will get a stimulus from the patient. The other one is a gaze tracker method in which a bars are there in the lower portion where you have a uptick means the patient is moving his eyes, downtick means the patient has closed his eyes. Fixation losses, the cutoff is 20%. They are flagged. Like you see here, there are 2 X marks here, 3 out of 10. At 20%, they are flagged. And the impression given is that test is of a low test reliability. False positives are a very important reliability index. In fact, now they are the only of all the reliable indexes, they are the most important. And it's actually a tendency of the patient to respond without a stimulus. You would know that when you do the Humphreys visual field, you have a sound as well as the light coming on. So when the sound comes, the patient actually should not click based on the sound. He should click based on the stimulus which is presented to him. But sometimes they follow the sound because that's also part of the testing strategy. So CETA uses a reaction time window to calculate false positive. So if the patient reacts within 50 milliseconds of the stimulus presentation, or more than 200 milliseconds after the stimulus presentation, it will be shown as a false positive. So that's how the strategy is being done. So this example, you can see here, this is a 10-year-old young patient. He has 44% false positive, and you have white scotomas here and here. So false positive +3, it's not very high. But what you can see is the pattern deviation plot is much worse than the total deviation plot. This is known as a reverse cataract pattern. Actually, cataract should have been here if the patient had cataract, and the pattern deviation should be clear. But you get a reverse cataract patient, and this is also known as a trigger happy patient. So he is trying to time the test. High false positive, you get a white scotoma. Again, this is again a feature of you can have a white scotoma in a 66-year-old person. There's a right and left field of the same individual, and you can find white scotomas. So since it's based on algorithm, you should not be fixed on your mind that it will occur only in certain people, it will not occur in certain people. So you should be open to your interpretation. High false negative you will get in a clover leaf pattern. So very elderly people, advanced glaucoma, patient fails to respond in previously thresholded point. These are all signs of you get a clover leaf scotoma like this, and it's not nowadays not considered a reliability parameter because we all know that glaucoma, the peripheral areas of the scotomas can always fluctuate, and they can always increase the level of the scotoma. Coming to rim scotoma. Rim scotomas, these are mainly because the trial lens has not been placed properly in a patient who has a high refractive error requirement. For example, the patient's foveal threshold is 36. He's got very good vision, visual acuity of 1.0, but look at his refraction, 3.25. 3.25, if the trial lens has not been placed properly, there's definitely going to be a little bit of error. So you find that the scotomas are marching behind the blind spot. Scotomas are marching behind the blind spot. And coming to the types of glaucoma field defect, that's very important for you to identify what are the types of glaucoma field defects. We keep it very simple. You have the nasal step, you have the arcuate and biarcuate, thread to fixation, and macular split. These are the common varieties which you usually see. So nasal step is nothing but the peripheral nasal points are depressed. So you have something like a one area is affected, but beneath that or above that, the corollary is also true, vice versa is also true. You don't have any defects. So this is a very typical nasal step. If you have a biarcuate scotoma, as I told you, glaucoma is a disease of asymmetry. So within the eye, you will have progression in one area, other area will be progressing a little slowly. So you'll have a central nasal step. Arcuate and biarcuate scotomas as shown here. And you have to identify whether the fixation is involved or not. Fixation is threatened or not. So in this particular pattern deviation, you see that there is a scotoma right in the near the fixation. So you do a 10-2. 10-2, you find that the central 4 points are not involved. So fixation is not involved. Whereas in this field, you have a central field defect. You do a 10-2, you find that the central area is involved. So this is involving field defect. Coming to macular split, there are a lot of ways you can define macular split, but for simplification, you can just say that if in one quadrant of a macular threshold program, all points is a macular split, or in the central 4 points, two of them are 0. For example, this is a 1 0 here, 1 0 here. You can say that is a macular split. So coming to Anderson's criteria. So we know what are the field defects, and we have to understand what are the Anderson's criteria. So the most important thing is in two consecutive fields. So we always give, we are always given one field and asked to comment on the Anderson's criteria. So actually you should give always two visual fields of the same patient done little few days apart or even 1 day apart. So it says that in two fields, location typical of a glaucoma defect, where the location of a glaucoma defect is usual, so that means it's in the arcuate region. A cluster of 3 or more non-edge points, all depressed to P less than 5%, one of which should be depressed to less than 1%. The GHD should be outside normal limits, and PSD should be less than 5%. So, and if you have a pre-test probability, two of the above criteria are sufficient to say that it is a positive Anderson's criteria. But the important thing you have to remember is where the defect is located, and it should be repeatable. So in two consecutive fields, it should be present. So coming to how the fields usually decay. So mean rate of progression for a normal visual decay, that is a person who doesn't have glaucoma, is 0.07 decibels per year. A common rate of progression in a clinical population with glaucoma, for example, if you take our clinic, the could be around 0.6 decibels per year. And mean rate of progression in an untreated glaucoma is 1.1 decibels per year. So if you, for example, if you take a person who is 60 years of age and he progresses, and to start off with, he's got 30 decibels, that's his threshold value. By the time he touches 70, he'll become practically, he'll have a tunnel vision. If you treat glaucoma sufficiently and he has 30 decibels to start with, by the time he's 76, 77, he'll have somewhere around 20. But if you treat effectively, you can even prolong it. So the idea of assessing glaucoma and assessing progression is the optic nerve should outlive the patient's life. That is the main aim of treatment. So you assess progression by visual field index or by mean deviation. These are the two things which you can always use for assessing progression. So, so progression, you can have either increase in the depth of defect, widening of the defect, or appearance of new defect. So these are three symbols which I've drawn here. If you see the red, the value here is 18 decibels. Now the depth keeps increasing. It becomes 18. Then after about 2 years, it becomes 17. Then after about another 6 months, it becomes 16. Then after about 6 more months, it becomes 0. Can you see that? Similarly, so the depth has increased, the defect has increased in depth. Now it is also involving the adjacent area. So it is actually spreading. So start off with 25, then becomes 23, then becomes 20, and then becomes 19. And adjacent points, new defects are also appearing. So for example, here, all of a sudden you have a defect which is 20 decibels. It was always 26, 27, 25, but all of a sudden it has become 20. That means a new defect has. So this is how you can, in an overview printout, this is known as an overview printout. All the fields are printed in one page, a maximum of 4 per page, and you can take out and you can see which areas are progressing. You can just look at the threshold values and you can identify which areas are progressing consecutively. Then we come to the guided progression analysis. This is a software which is you have to purchase it, and it's very helpful for us to manage day-to-day glaucoma patients and assess the progression. The important thing you have to remember is you require minimum 5 fields are required for using this. So we encourage our patients to, even now the World Glaucoma Association recommends that a newly diagnosed glaucoma patient should do at least 6 visual fields in 2 years. So at least you get a minimum of 5 fields to start utilizing this feature. So what it does is it actually compares the last visual field. This is March 2020 to the 2012 and 2013 visual field. So you can see all the spots here. The visual field value which is here is covered in a circle. That means this has been selected as the baseline for that individual field report. And all the others are compared to the previous 2 baseline. So this gives you a trend analysis. So what is the trend? And then you also get a rate of progression. So this is in visual field index values, minus 0.3 plus minus 0.1 percentage per year. And then you get a event analysis. Event analysis is each point is compared to its baseline, and the deviation is compared to the deviation which can exist in glaucoma patients who are having the same type of field defect. So this gives you an event analysis. So just to give you an example, you have two visual field progressing here. You have a minus 4.5 plus minus 1.9 percentage per year here. And then you have another rate of progression, which is 0.9 plus minus 1.1 percentage per year. This is based on the visual field index. So how this works is you have the visual field index graph. So what is the estimated rate of change? This line shows you the estimated rate of change, and then extrapolation of the current to the current trend towards the next 5 years. That can be done. And what is the current amount of visual function? This line, the black horizontal line, shows the current amount of visual function. If you don't intervene here, he will go down here. So, and for the next 5 years, what is the prediction value? From this point to this point, this point to this point, what is the prediction value? And you also have the ages here. So you have 65, 70, 75. So the patient started checking with us around the age of 63, 64, and then we have his data, and we can also tell the patient if treatment is not being taken effectively, this is likely to go down. So this helps to show the patients and the relatives what could happen if effective treatment is not taken or administered properly. So this is just to give you an example. We operated this patient in the somewhere. He's been following us from the age of 55, and around the age of 62 we operated him, because we found that his visual field was actually going down. So he drastically dipped here, and then we explained to him that this is a very fast rate of progression. You can see here it's -1 plus minus 1.5. That's quite unacceptable. And if the trend continues, by the time he's around the age of 75, he may one or two if the visual field if it progresses very faster than what we anticipate, he may even lose his vision. So we operated him here. You can see the mark here, which is available in the Forum software. And once we did the surgery, then we took these 2 points as the baseline. Because once you have intervened in a patient, you have to reset the baseline. Once we reset the baseline, the rate of progression changed dramatically from minus 1.0 to minus 0.1. Of course, you have a very high standard deviation of plus minus 7.0, but that's we cannot avoid that because there's a drastic dip here. And again, the patient has a little bit of learning curve to do the visual field. So if you have a very high standard deviation, that means the patient is again stabilizing and learning to do a visual field. There may be learning effect. So, but you can see that this visual field progression has actually flattened out. So like this, you can utilize the trend analysis. So these are some of the examples. So this is a patient who has a minus 0.3 decibel per year change. And if he continues in this throughout his life, he is not going to have any glaucoma related blindness event in his life. Whereas this individual, he has a minus 1.8 rate of progression. And if the condition deteriorates or for some reason he's not able to take the treatment, he may dip, and then in his lifetime he may have a glaucoma related instance of partially going blind. Whereas this particular individual has a -7 rate of progression. So definitely we need to do something here so that we can arrest it. He has dropped from the age of 62 to the age of 70. In 8 years, he has dropped dramatically. So this is very important for us to understand how to assess the rate of progression, which patients you can just follow up even extensively and give longer follow-up dates, and which patients need to be closely monitored. So this is just a video. to show you how you can look at the so if you see here, this shows you you just concentrate here, you can find that the scotomas are changing. So you have an open triangle, and then you have a half closed triangle, half black triangle, and then you have a black triangle. So in the center area, as this is available in the forum software to teach our fellows. So how you can get an event analysis is by looking at the points which are deteriorating faster. So it is done using the help of the software, and open triangle indicates that the deviation from baseline showing a statistically significant difference, p less than 5% amongst the glaucoma patients. Half black triangle shows that the same 3 or more points are showing statistically significant progression on 2 or more fields, and full black triangle shows when the same 3 or more points are showing statistically significant progression on 3 or more fields. So this is how it looks. So if you look at this, switch on my pointer. Yeah, if you look at the point here, the x's show that to begin with itself, those areas are not responsive to the stimulus, and the machine will not analyze those areas. That means to start off, the scotomas were pre-existing when the patient presented to the software. Now look at this point. You have one area which is bereft of any defect. Here it becomes a open triangle. So the first time scotoma appears, it is compared to the existing glaucoma patients, and then shows that this is not supposed to be there, but it has come. Second time it comes converted into a half black triangle. So it is continues to exist. Now third time it comes, it gets converted into a black triangle, and you're given a printout as possible progression. So you have two visual fields, and this third, once it comes into the third visual field, it is showing as a likely progression. So similarly for other areas, for example, if you were to take this triangle, again it is converted into a half black triangle, and then you get converted into a full black triangle, and then a full black triangle. So 3 steps it is converted, and then you get a likely progression. So cluster of 3 points, if were to happen, they don't have to be clustered, but they can be present randomly, and you are getting a likely progression. Sometimes in some situations, the trend analysis doesn't give you that information, especially if you're looking at the close to fixation. You have to look at the event analysis, because event analysis can progress without the trend progressing. That is also possible. So this is another type of printout which I mentioned earlier. This is known as a 3-in-1 printout. So here the patient has very low vision. He's got a visual acuity of 6/60 only, and we are using a size 5 white stimulus. And this is a full threshold strategy. So you don't get an analysis for this, because the computer doesn't have a normative data for this sort of presentation. So what you exactly get is the patient's true values with a size 5 stimulus, and you have to make your own interpretation of whether it is deteriorating, on serial examinations, whether it is deteriorating or remaining stable. So you have a 24-2, and then you have a 3-in-1 10-2, and then you also have a 3-in-1 macular threshold programming. So progression analysis with Octopus, it has a proprietary software called iSuite that is available with the machine. What you get is global trend analysis, cluster trend analysis, and polar trend analysis. So if you have a progressing visual field rate, diffuse localized progression, all these can be analyzed. It's quite interesting to use this. I don't have personally any experience using it, but for your applications in clinic, or if you have the machine, it's quite interesting. You have a very consolidated view of all the features. So in this, you get a mean defect, which is a trend analysis, and you also get a description. So it says that 0.9 decibels per year is the rate of change. And then if you have a worsening, you get a symbol like this. So mean defect. And then it says that it is worsening. So P significant worsening at P less than 5% level. And then you have all these symbols. So the V says that worsening at P less than 5%, and the closed red triangle says worsening at P less than 1%, and then if you have improvement, that is also, and when you get the output, you can have the line which says the MD trend line, and you have a value here. It tells the what is the slope of that line. It is 1.9 decibels per year, and from 2000 till 2005, this is an example just given. And you have the cluster trend. So the octopus has divided the retinal region into 4 clusters superiorly, 4 clusters inferiorly, and each according to cluster also you can get a analysis. So this is also helpful to compare instead of you having a GHT like the Humphreys, you can have a cluster trend analysis, which will also tell you the asymmetry between the superior and the inferior half, and then you get an interpretation. And you get global trend analysis. So you have mean deviation is your mean deviation which is present in the Humphreys, and loss variance is your PSD, and you can have either a diffuse defect or a localized defect. So if you want to differentiate between a global depression and a localized depression also, that is also possible in octopus. Another interesting thing is it uses the, like I mentioned, you have a superior and inferior disparity in progression. So you have the superior pole sometimes not progressing as fast as the inferior pole. So if you don't have an imaging device, this can function as a corollary to the imaging device. So you have something called the polar trend analysis, which pole is worsening, and as the red line extends, it tells you the how deep the defect is. So if the extends up to the 30 degree, that means it's a very extensive defect, and also it extends quite deep also. It's wide also and it's deep also. So like that you can get a polar trend analysis with the so I'll stop here. Do we have any questions? This is for the visual field. Then I have the imaging.
So it's a very informative talk, sir. You have beautifully covered the HFA from A to Z.
If anybody has any questions, we can take them. Next is the imaging.
So
you can all
participants, please be free to put your questions in the chat box so that we can have the discussion. Sir, which one do you prefer, HFA or octopus? Which is more user friendly?
I mean, it's not possible to have both the machines. More than us getting confused, the patients will get confused. So, and usually I was speaking to other experts also, like why people don't port from one machine to the other machine. There's significant data loss which occurs. So if you are working on octopus and you are practicing for, let's say, 5 years, 6 years, and you have all your patients on the octopus, and if you port from octopus to first of all, you cannot port the data, you cannot take the data. It's not like cell phone portability, you cannot take, and you'll lose a lot of data. Even if you were to do it, you lose a lot of data. So people working on a particular system will continue to work on that system, and it's actually a question of economics more than what you like to do, because we are provided with all the facilities here, so we are comfortable doing it.
And sir,
it
how
always
often
becomes
do you yes, sir.
tell me, madam.
Sir, how often do you advise HFA for your patients, glaucoma patients?
Actually, we advise very frequently, but as you saw some of the examples which I gave, the patients will come after 1 year and do the field test. So, so it's very difficult. Although we advise n number of times, patients take their own sweet time to do it. But recommendation is to at least within the first 3 visits, each visit we try to do a visual, but that's also very difficult. At least 2 years we try to get a minimum of 6 visual field, but practically that is not possible. But we advise every visit, we tell them we'd like to see you with a visual field. So there's a question, what is the minimum visual acuity for a proper field? What are the options for field charting in patients with poor visual acuity? So the Humphreys visual field has a kinetic perimetry program also. So if a patient who is aphakic and has a vision of, let's say, 4/60 or 5/60, you can do a very nice with a very large size stimulus size, you can do a kinetic perimetry. helps to the patient and for us to understand what is the visual field status. Like I showed you, there was a 3-in-1 printout in which the visual acuity was 6/60. So up to 3/60 and above, as long as they're not legally blind, you can do it. 3/60 is the lower cutoff, but you may have to change your tactic. You may have to do a little different type of, you can have to do a kinetic charting rather than a. So the kinetic charting is mouse based. The operator has to use the mouse in the isopter and then give the stimulus so that the patient responds to it. So the pattern also, which operators can know and do it. We do it for some of our patients who require this. So I think there's one more question. What will you do if visual field repeatedly becomes unreliable? So some people can never do a visual field. That we have to understand. We can try maybe 4 times. Once we find that they are not, then you have to do some other way of assessing their glaucoma, because sometimes patients can not really do visual field. Then you have to look at the structure assessment. So that becomes very, very important. Unreliable visual field, some of the examples I could have shown you. Sometimes after the 4th field, then only the reliability picks up. So you must not let go as long as the patient is less than 80 years of age, 80, 85 years of age, they are physically fit. No problem in spending some time on if they are used to using computers and all, they know how the machine works. I think they can do a very good visual field.
I think questions are over, sir.
Okay, I'll proceed with the imaging talk. Okay. So this is on imaging, and imaging, as you all know, starts from disc photography. Before that, we used to do fundus drawing. It was very subjective and dependent on observers and experience. But disc photography changed all that. So you can even have stereoscopic disc photography, which is the gold standard in many clinical trials. But for the present situation and today's talk, we'll talk about the imaging OCT device. We are very familiar with the Zeiss OCT device. So this is the others are also available. Spectralis, the Topcon. I'll just touch upon some of them. But common to all of them is that you should know what test you have ordered, and a few basic things like signal strength, image centering, movement artifact, and then how to read uh, uh, the output which you have given and how to interpret the data. So you must know that the normative database for the optic nerve head and retinal nerve fiber layer in the Zeiss is you have a spherical error range that is minus 12 to plus this 6 diopter sphere. The axial length which can be analyzed is up to 22 to 28 millimeters. So less than 22 and more than 28, the machine usually defaults and you may not get a very good analysis. Some of the examples I'll show you. Highly myopic and highly hyperopic eyes have different RNFL profile. So myopic eyes will have the retinal nerve fiber bundles towards the nasal side. Hyperopic eyes, retinal nerve fiber bundle superior inferior will be pushed towards the temporal side. So that is something which you have to remember. And disk size also matters. So the machine, especially the Zeiss, less than 1.33 and more than 2.5, it will not analyze. So it's very important that you try to get the assessment of the disk before you send the patient for OCT, because after that, whatever output comes, you may not be able to interpret it very nicely. And vertical CD ratio, like very highly hyperopic eyes, less than 0.25 CDR, it won't be able to analyze. You won't get the disk data. And normative database does not include data from less than 18 years of age. That doesn't mean you should not do OCT for children who require it of less than 18, because the moment they start turning more than 18, what you start getting is a guided progression analysis. That means you can get a easily, because children are they cooperate better than adults. You can start scanning them and if they are having glaucoma at young age for whatever reason, you can start scanning them. And then once they have turned 18, you can start getting the progression analysis very easily. And in the database, you have to remember very few myopes are included. So that's a caveat. What we have is the color coding. So if you all look at your OCT image, you have 3 color codes. So one is the color code for the RNFL thickness map. RNFL thickness map. So it ranges from 0 microns to 350 microns. This is one color code. This is only for the RNFL thickness map. The second color code is for the all the others. So here you can see Asian distribution. So this includes the table here, and then the RNFL thickness profile, the Tissnes graph, the sector and the quadrant analysis, and also the deviation map. So the color coding is for all these 3 put together. 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5 put together. This is the color coding for this. Then there's a last color coding, which is the for the tomogram. The tomogram color coding is a false color. So high reflectance areas are red, green, and yellow. The low reflectance areas are black or blue. So that is what you have to understand. So the blue which you see here is a very low reflectance area, and the red, green, and yellow are the high reflectance area. So the color codes are like that. So here, for example, if you see, the visual field for this individual is very normal. So 100% visual field index, mean deviation which is positive. So you may call that the patient doesn't have any defect in the visual field. Very young patient also. But if you look at the OCT, you have a mild defect here. Okay, only in one sector analysis it is showing as a 100 microns. Okay, others are all 144, 60. It's all normal area. But you have, so this is a mild glaucomatous defect in the OCT. This is something a little bit moderate glaucoma. So you have bilaterally, you have inferior RNFL defects, which are represented in the sector maps very nicely. So you have 74 in the left eye, and you have 53 in the right eye in the inferotemporal sector region, and the total sector in the total quadrant map, you find instead of having something around closer to 120, it is only 90 in the right eye, and whereas the superior in the left eye is 121, it is only 90. So this is something like a moderate glaucoma, and then this is a very advanced glaucoma. So once you have a defect in the OCT, same as visual field, you have to identify whether it is worsening or not. So if the defect depth deepens, that is worsening. So something like 70 becomes 40, and it is 70 becomes 60, or 70 becomes 50, then it is defect is increasing depth. If the defect expands, for example, you have 80 here, and then it defect also deepens, and then it encroaches on the adjacent area, that is also progression. Or if other sectors, new areas, defect starts appearing, that is a progression. So progression OCT is also very, very simple. But coming to interpretation, you have to have a good quality signal. So reduced signal strength results in a thin average RNFL, that we have to remember. And reduced signal strength can be because of device malfunction, poor patient cooperation, poor scanning technique of the operator. In the Zeiss device, the signal strength should be better than 7. So range is from 1 to 10. In Spectralis, the quality score should be better than 20. The range is from 1 to 40. Another thing which affects the scanning is the motion artifact. So microseconds can usually occur 5 per second in a normal person. So active tracking actually eliminates these motion artifacts and also enhances the time taken to acquire the image. But and motion artifacts most commonly identified as vessel discontinuity and can occur even with excellent signal strength. So for example, if you see here, you have a good signal strength, 10 out of 10 for both the eyes. Whereas if you see here, this region which is expanded here, you have vessel discontinuity, and here again you have vessel discontinuity. So although you have very good signal strength, but you have motion artifact. Break in the continuity of vessels as motion artifact. So you're very, very aware of interpreting such a field, such a OCT. Again, another example here. You can find that there is a discontinuity of the vessel in the deviation map. Segmentation errors means that the layers of retina are not differentiated properly. So it can occur in high myopes and hyperopes. As I mentioned, you can have segmentation problem in high myopes and high hyperopes because the RNFL profile is totally changed. Myelinated nerve fibers can also cause segmentation errors. Tilted disc, peripapillary atrophy, usual cause the anatomical variations. For example, here find there's a peripapillary atrophy and the OCT is not able to identify this. So it is showing the nasal region as a very high bump here in the circular tomogram. The center portion represents the nasal region, the peripheral portion represents the temporal region. So here it is showing as a very high, so there's a segmentation error. So anatomical variations can cause this. So if you have a fundus photo like this, a fundus image like this is not an ideal candidate to undergo imaging. If you were to image, you will find that there's actually something like a cephaloma, and the errors are quite significant. The circular tomogram shows you RNFL is at all not able to be read here. Scan alignment centration can also cause something called a red disease. Red disease means that actually the retinal nerve fiber layer is healthy, but because of certain issues with the operator or the machine or not able to align properly, you are getting a red disease because it's so badly aligned. You find that the retinal nerve fiber layer pattern is fully in the red area. So unnecessarily you'll be over treating the patient or over diagnosing glaucoma, or you'll be frightening the patient by giving a diagnosis of glaucoma or saying that the retinal nerve fiber is very, very poor in that particular area. This we did for one of our colleagues, and we purposefully decentered the scan. If you decenter the scan purposefully, you find that certain areas which are actually healthy have showing a red disease. Once we recentered the scan, all the pattern became normal. See, you can see that it's following the double hump pattern, and the right eye and the left eye are within the normal range. So scan centering is very, very important to identify unnecessary artifactual defect in the retinal nerve fiber layer. Poor image centration. So I showed you that tomograms, these are known as the tomograms which are present in all the machines. When you are scanning them, the tomogram image should be in the middle of the screen like this. They should not be too low. They should not be touching the border of the area which you see here. So they should be right in the middle. So that gives you a well-centered image. Media opacities like cataract, asteroid hallosis, posterior capsule opacification, ocular surface disease, vitreous hemorrhage can all cause problems in scanning. So asteroid hallosis. If you see here, you can see that there is a severe asteroid hallosis. You're not able to see the disc features properly. You have an inferior RNFL defect here, but the superior area is being missed. The patient actually has a bipolar notch. Coexisting pathology like Burgmeister's papilla. So, for example, here, this again, a patient has a bipolar notch. The superior neuroretinal rim is also thinned out, but the Burgmeister's papilla, which is here, is showing as a thickened area of retina. If you look at the circular tomogram here, you find there's a very thick area of nerve fiber, which is interpreted as a machine as being supranormal. So you have a value of 164 here, and then you have a comparative value of 127 in the other eye. So any coexisting pathology can give you a supranormal value, which again is interpreted as a green disease. So you not only have a red disease, you also have a green disease in which other pathologies can mimic a retinal nerve fiber layer and give you supranormal values. If you don't look at it closely with a stereoscopic view, you may miss it. So for these patients in which imaging is not very appropriate, it's better to do a fundus photography regularly and also do a visual field for assessing their progression. So certain situations imaging is helpful, certain situations visual field is helpful. So in the same image, you see the extracted circular tomogram. I just wanted to highlight this specifically so that you can get a better view of this. And the RNFL thickness map shows really supranormal values, very wide also, not only in that particular narrow band of the nerve fiber layer, but actually it shows this whole superior area as being very thick, which actually usually is not, even in a normal individual, that is not present. Epiretinal membrane. So you can see here, as I'm pointing here, there's a fine epiretinal membrane here. Now this lies in the temporal area. If you were to examine the retinal nerve fiber layer, you find that in the left eye, which is the dotted line, the right eye of the RNFL thickness is the continuous line, the left eye is a dotted line. The temporal region goes superior to the dotted line goes superior to the continuous line. That means the left eye temporal RNFL thickness is thicker than the right eye temporal RNFL thickness. If you're not looking for this, or if you have not examined the patient properly, you'll get you'll assume that this is a normal value, and then you may even disregard it. So actually this thickness is mainly because of the epiretinal membrane, which you can see here even in the RNFL deviation map. So here it is a magnified view. You can see that the dotted line is higher than the continuous line on both the sides because they come and join in the temporal raphe. Disc edema. So this is a patient of VKH who was resolving, and once the disc edema and the retinal edema was resolving, the OCT was done, and you can see that again you have a supranormal values in the left eye. The dotted line represents the left eye, the continuous line represents the right eye. So right eye is you can take it as the comparator in the normal, whereas the left eye, the disc edema is quite severe, and the RNFL shows a supranormal values with a lot of edema in the circular tomogram. So all this can, again, if you are not looking for it, if you are not examined the patient clinically, can put you off guard. So this is another instance. Can you? This is since we are not able to, have interactive, but I'll just explain to you. This is quite interesting. The right eye of the patient was examined actually was examined both for the right as well as in left eye. So unless in a very busy clinic, you may think that this is a normal feature, but actually this is you have to identify and make sure that the operator does not repeat such a mistake. And then when you repeat the scan, you get the true picture. So if you look at the pattern, it looks almost the same. You may almost neglect it and send off the patient, but you have to identify that whether the right eye and the left eye has been correctly scanned or not. What we now have is a new PanoMap analysis. Now the PanoMap analysis, as the image shows here, includes in one image the optic disc, the macula, and the intervening retinal nerve fiber layer. So the idea is to assess ganglion cell integrity as well as the optic nerve head integrity and the retinal nerve fiber layer integrity at one single glance. So just to show you, these are all different patients, but this is a normal PanoMap of an individual, and this is again a normal PanoMap of another individual. And here you start getting mild of another individual have early defect, and you find that the ganglion cell complex in the superior area is little defective, and that's why you have the GCL and IPL layer as little abnormal. They are marked in yellow here, and then they get to marked in red if the ganglion cell layer complex becomes very, very thin. So average GCL and IPL thickness and the minimum GCL IPL thickness are very low, so you get marked in red. That means that's a very you could say that this is a maculopathy, early onset of glaucoma, because glaucoma you can start identifying based on the ganglion cell complex now itself. You also have guided progression analysis with the OCT. You have this is the baseline 1 and baseline 2, and then you have the exam 5 and exam 6 of the right eye and the left eye of the patient. And you can find that you get the superior RNFL thickness profile, the inferior RNFL thickness profile, the average RNFL thickness. You find that they are not deviating at all in the right eye, and the left eye also they are being maintained. So you have almost 6 examinations. If you want to see all the details of the 6 examinations, you can see here. Here you find that there is a defect which is getting enlarged. So why is because the signal strength is also correspondingly falling down. So this again, you have to look at the chart in detail. And these serial examinations will tell you what was the signal in 2018 and what was the signal in 2020, and helps you to assess whether your machine needs to be reset, because they have certain spectrometers in the machine, which they could be the reason for falling in the signal strength for the same individual. Because when we examine the patient appears okay, but the signal strength is correspondingly falling. And again, if you look at the left eye, again the signal strength was 6/10, but now it is 2/10. So these are all, whether it's a machine related factor or a patient related factor, you can identify it by serially looking at the and come to a interpretation. You also have structure function correlation. Now we try to do a structure function correlation, because that's what we whatever defect we see, they should be either they should be correlated to the either in the function wise or the structure wise. So for example, you have a when you examine, you have an inferior notch, so to say, and an RNFL defect here. Now this corresponds to the upper field defect the patient has, but the patient has a lot of field defects. Now which area does this really correspond to? So the machine automatically gives you an area. The red area marked here is the most likely area of visual field defect caused by this retinal nerve fiber layer defect. The adjacent areas are less likely to be the reason for that, and they may disappear in subsequent field. So what areas you have to concentrate on based on the structural defect, the machine gives you an output. For example, again, another example, you have a very small slit defect here in the left eye, the superior retinal nerve fiber layer defect. Now this is a slit defect. So now this area corresponds to the central yellow area marked here, but whereas the patient has a big rim scotoma. Now, based on this, you can exclude all the other scotomas and say that these are all because of rim scotomas. The only region which is likely to be cause of that is this small area which is marked yellow here. So structure and function tells you exactly which area to concentrate on, which area to disregard, and make sure that they repeat visual field. The rim defect, which is caused by maybe most probably because of the it's not being kept properly or whatever the other reasons, the repeatability is there, and you can confirm this. So another aspect which we all look at is pre-perimetric glaucoma. So for example, this individual patient had 100% visual field index in the right and left eye, and again, he had a repeat visual field which was normal, and 3 times visual field was normal. Mean deviation was always positive. But if you look at his retinal nerve fiber layer here in the right eye, there is a significant defect in the superior and inferior quadrants, whereas the left eye is doing well. So he is a diagnosed patient of open angle glaucoma, and pre-perimetrically itself he was diagnosed, and then he was being on treatment. So his visual fields are stable, and his structure is also continues to remain the same without deterioration. So this is a magnified view of the same, so you can see a little better. You can see that his inferior retinal nerve fiber layer, this is the Tisnett graph, and this shows a dip in the inferior quadrant, which is in the red area, and the left eye is doing perfectly okay. So again, this is a individual I showed as a previous example. So she's a monocular patient with visual field index of 100%, and she's got, this is the mild RNFL defect in the OCT, and in the fundus photo and the gray in the red tree also you can find out that there's a little bit of defect, retinal nerve fiber defect here. You can also subtly make it out, but the visual field shows that it is normal. The visual field index shows normal. But if you look at the numerical plot, so you have the center as 34, 35, whereas a numerical plot, it becomes 33, 31, 30, and 27 in the superior nasal region. So if you were to do a look at the pattern deviation numerical plot, you find that, coming back to what was discussed earlier, you find that 34 has been taken as the threshold for that particular age, and then the 7th best point has been arrived at, that is at -2, which is added to all the points. So if you were to add -2 to -4, -2 to -2, it becomes -4, minus 2 to -1, it becomes -3, and -2 to 1, it becomes 1. So actually, if you see, there is a little bit of depression which is already going on. So pre-perimetric glaucoma can, at a single glance, you may think that it is pre-perimetric, but actually, if you look at the raw data and the pattern deviation plot, you can identify that this patient already has a defect, which is not statistically significant as compared to the age-matched normal. So as of now, she you can say that it is pre-perimetric, but actually, if you look at closely, it is not actually pre-perimetric. So you have to look at the numerical plot very carefully, and also look at the pattern deviation plot very carefully, and say whether it is a pre-perimetric or perimetric glaucoma. So in this, so I designed just 2 quizzes, but I'll just explain to you what actually happened. So it will be a interesting scenario. So this patient I examined, and the moment I examined, I thought everything's normal. You know, the right eye looks healthy, left eye also looks similar to the right eye. And usually we ask patients who present to us do a visual field. Once the visual field came, this is what it came out to be. So of course, like with experience, you can say this is a rim scotoma. But what I was not very happy was, why were these 2 points in the periphery here? You know, you can have 1 point, but why 2? So I was not very convinced why it should be a nasal step in this region. So nasal step, as I mentioned, is one of the earliest forms of scotoma because of glaucoma. So once we got the OCT done, we in the TopCon, like I mentioned, you get a color photograph as well as a red-free photograph. When I looked at the red-free photograph, there's a very nice retinal nerve fiber layer defect there, which can be made out. And the sector maps and the quadrant map also shows superior RNFL defect. So once you go back to the patient and re-examine, you find that there's a superior notch which was missed because of being a very small disc. So in small disc, you have to be extremely very careful. So another individual who presented to us, and he did the field like this. You have a superior some areas which are defective, and inferior a broad area which is defective. So we thought, okay, we are looking at a glaucoma patient, and then we do a 10-2. 10-2 showed a very broad defect, and once we took a took a fundus photo, we found that this is because of a branch vein occlusion. So visual fields per se, you should always correlate clinically. That's the take-home message. And make sure that you look at the fundus, anticipate what defects you are going to expect, and then order for a test. So I'll stop here. If thank you for a patient listening. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Ma'am, you have to unmute, ma'am. Sarisa ma'am, yeah.
Now the floor is open for discussion. PG students, if you have any questions, please be free to type it in the chat box given here. Sir, how do we differentiate an optic pit from a glaucomatous cupping, sir? What are the salient features so that
you always can get secondary pits actually in advanced glaucoma. So the important thing is, if it's a primary pit, then you have to look at how soon the patient was detected, and then if there is associated retinal pathology, all those will go in favor of a primary optic pit. And also you have a central field defect starting very quickly. So that is the main, and patients always will have a unilateral entity compared to a bilateral entity. Whereas secondary pits, because of glaucoma, can will be bilateral and not so very deep.
There is one question, interpreting tilted disk with NRR loss. Tilted disk with NRR loss in OCT.
NRR loss, tilted disk, in OCT, usually tilted disk you cannot interpret. So for that, we usually use the fundus photography itself. And visual fields you can do in such eyes. So tilted disk and tilted disk syndromes are two different things. Tilted disk syndromes will usually have a superior field effects. Every time you do a field effect, they will get a superior field effect. Inferiorly, if you do OCT, you'll find a very wide area of defect, but they're not actually pathological. The Blue Mountain Eye study has nicely described the two variants. If you see the study, they have nicely described both the entities. Usually, optic nerves which are not very, you cannot really, analyze them in a automated sort of imaging way. Better to do a fundus photography, and because it will only increase the confusion.
Sir, one more query is there. How do you integrate? You mentioned about structure function analysis. So how do you integrate the HFA and OCT for the structure function analysis, sir?
Yeah, this is using a software. This is proprietary of Zeiss. You can have the structure and function analysis into the same machine. The software will take all the information like fundus image, the OCT image, and the visual field, and you can choose if you want. You can use the HFA of today's, and then disk photographs of 6 months back, and the OCT of 6 months back, and then integrate all the three, and then you can come out with a nice. Everything is software driven, and it's actually expensive but available. It's a software driven integration program.
Okay, sir.
It's known as a Forum software, and then we use it regularly for all our patients.
So the name of the software, sir?
Forum, FORUM. It's by Zeiss, Carl Zeiss, because they are the only company who have both the visual field as well as the imaging device. Other companies either have imaging or they don't have a imaging, or they don't have a visual field. So either of them they have, but this is one company which has both together, and that's the advantage of using this. Now it's pretty useful. There are advocates for and against it, so I wouldn't get into the argument. But since it's available, we find it very useful, especially for teaching as well as for practice purposes.
Okay. Sir, one more query. Do you use both HFA and OCT for assessing progression?
Oh, definitely. OCT is recommended for early glaucomas, patients who have been diagnosed recently, who don't have so much of field effect like I showed to you. Increase in defect depth, widening of the defect, all those things you can identify in OCT very quickly. So we use both. We try to do visual field analysis as well as OCT analysis. We use both together simultaneously. Very advanced glaucomas who we may not get too much of information. We try to do a macular program in them if the macular is healthy.
So which one do you prefer, ganglion cell thickness or RNFL thickness for assessing progression? Which is better?
Standard is RNFL thickness. RNFL thickness has, as of now, there is no value to which has been put. For example, if you have a sector map or a sector map, you really cannot say by how much value of the RNFL reduces. You can say that it is progressing. Whether it is 8 microns or 10 microns or 4 microns, as of now, value has not been put by the World Glaucoma Association, which we follow. But nevertheless, RNFL is the most important parameter which has been documented to change in progressive glaucoma. So ganglion cell, as of now, it's still in the assessment, and people are giving opinions. New studies are coming out, but it hasn't come into vogue as yet. But in suspects, you can use it. In advanced glaucoma, also to some extent, you can use it.
Any more queries? Sir, is it possible to pick up early papilledema in this suspicious discs, early papilledema? Can we pick up from optic viscosity?
Yeah, but you can. This was a question which was asked, I think, one of the GSI forum also, how to differentiate a small disc or a hypermetropic disc with papilledema. But I think intraocularly the signs may not be so. You have to really look for extraocular signs. Intraocularly, very difficult to differentiate between a nasal blurring of the disc margin to a papilledema. It's very difficult. So visual acuity, color vision, all those things will play a more important role rather than imaging device as such. Of course, you can image uh, uh, the optic nerve, but I would suggest that instead of going in for a OCT, just a fundus photography is more sufficient. A 30-degree central field, central area of focusing on the optic disc will give you far better impression rather than doing a OCT. OCT will misguide you in various other ways. So it's better always to keep things a little less complicated and then do simple things. But visual acuity, color vision, RAP related to papilledema, all those things will be more useful than looking at the disc. It's quite a you can do OCT. For example, if you are convinced that this is a patient with papilledema papillitis, and it helps in prognosticating. So once you get RNFL thickness, and if you have the other eye as a comparator, so if you have a good RNFL profile in the other eye, then you can prognosticate that this eye is also likely to would have been healthy, and it can tolerate any amount of insult to some extent. So prognostication, yes, it is useful, but not once it has papilledema set in. But you can use the other eye as a reference value. And serially also, once the condition is resolved, you can see that whether it's coming back to normal or not. So prognostication wise, it is useful, but to diagnosing, I wouldn't recommend that.
Yes, one question is here, the role of OCT angiography in glaucomas.
I'm not. There's a recent paper which has come out. The macular region arterioles thickness is, but I really wouldn't like to comment on that. I really don't know actually. If I find out and let you know. But as of now, we are not looking into that in so much detail.
Yes, sir. So can long-term diabetes give false interpretation on RNFL map?
Long-term diabetes can possibly. There are a lot of things which happen in diabetes. Diabetes and also the treatment of diabetes. For example, many of our patients will be on, you can say that they'll be on metformin. That is a very commonly used medication. Metformin induces lactic acidosis. We all know that. Once it induces lactic acidosis, there's a little bit of change in the corneal thickness also. So all these play a little bit of factor. So I really don't know how much diabetes can affect the RNFL map. We haven't looked into that as such. I really wouldn't know the answer to that. But it's an interesting thought.
So do we start treatment if only ganglion cell is affected?
No, I don't think we have any guidelines for that. There's no recommendation to that also. The idea of looking at ganglion cell is that there is no variation between human beings. All macula appears the same, unlike disc. There's a eightfold variation in the profile morphology of optic disc in the population. So if you have a eightfold variation, very difficult to identify to analyze all such variations. But macula appears the same for all the people. But so far, like I mentioned before, there is no guideline to say. You can just say that ganglion cell complex is thinning out, and most probably because of glaucoma, because of other features like maybe a thinner CCT or a higher pressure or pseudo exfoliation or some such issue, and explain it to the patient, and then discuss with the patient whether if that is the main cause, or if you can say something like a pre-test probability. You have all these tests, and after you when you have the evidence in your hand, you can discuss with the patient. Based on that, then you can take a call. But I wouldn't really like to treat a patient just based on ganglion cell. And ganglion cell we don't do so commonly also, although we have this, we are looking into it in detail.
Any more questions?
There was another
from the
question,
postgraduates?
swap, how often?
Yes, sir. Yeah, one more question
I think
from the
Dr. Bindu
previous
asked
topic.
whether we do swap.
Swap.
Yeah, swap we almost stopped doing now because it's a very difficult test to do. Takes more time. We almost do 30, 35 a day, and swap, since it takes more time, it's more laborious. So we almost have stopped doing swap. We have stopped doing swap for many years now. Because there are other ways of identifying early defect development. So imaging helps a lot in that. So we are sort of this idea of swap was you could predict visual field defect on white 5 years before they actually occurred. But if you have imaging device, that makes it more possible to do it early on.
Sir, in non-cooperative patients, patients who are not cooperative for field testing, can we identify neurological defects from? Can we pick it up from OCTs if possible, sir? Like bitemporal defects and all.
I have certain photographs in which we had a patient who had occipital infarct and he showed a retinal nerve fiber layer defect, but they occur so symmetrically that you would be misled actually. You would be misled for thinking they have a glaucoma. So because of that, we don't usually recommend doing that. Can I share my slide? I'll just show you that example. So if you see this image here, can you see the retinal nerve fiber layer superior, inferior in the right eye?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So this is actually retrograde degeneration because of an occipital infarct in the right lobe. You know, the left eye looks white, dark, white. The right eye looks dark, white, dark. So if you look at the fundus photograph, the left eye is normal, whereas the right eye, so you'll be really misled into starting the patient on treatment if you were to do OCT and this gets picked up as, you know, superior, inferior RNFL defects, and you miss out the occipital infarct history, you would invariably put the patient on treatment. So this is just an example, just to show you that you know, if you use imaging too much more than clinical examination and history taking, then it could be possible to have very high false positive rates for defect identification.
Sir, it was a very informative talk, sir.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Over to Mihir,
It was more of a talk for us than the PGs. We also learned a lot today.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ganesh. Thanks a lot. As usual, your talks are always very informative and thought-provoking. So I'll now invite Dr. Bindu to give the vote of thanks.
Hello. Yeah, Dr. Ganesh, it's really a pleasure to thank you on this eve of Teachers' Day because you have been my teacher during my training in Arvind actually. So it was
Thank you,
really
madam.
an excellent class for both, like what Mihir told, for both for PGs and for us also. Thank you very much for coming here and taking a class for us virtually. Now, next I would like to thank Mihir and Dr. Shishira for conducting this program so very efficiently and interactively. And I would also like to thank Dr. Vijayalakshmi and Dr. Sujit who put all these ideas to create such a good learning platform for the PGs actually. And I'd like all the participants who have taken part in the session. I hope you have really gained so much knowledge on HFA and OCT. And I would also like to thank Ms. Chaitanya and Mr. Sarjan and all the Sun Pharma Milmet Group who have given us this platform so that we could share knowledge during this time. Thank you. Thank you everyone for this.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mihir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ganesh. And I hope you don't mind if we trouble you again.
No, no, not at all. It's a pleasure.
Yeah,
Not at
we
all.
might trouble you in the future.
Oh, yes, definitely. Anytime. I'm just a phone call away.
Sure, sure.
Thank you. Good night.
So thank you. So thank you all. So keep tuned, and we'll be having our next PG Buster Module 3 program next Saturday. So I request all of you to join for that. Thank you, Dr. Ganesh, once more. So we'll
Thank you.
end the meeting now.
Yes,
Good
sir.
night, all. Good
Thank
night.
you. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, sir.